Self-identification is really tricky for me. I think we can all relate to that experience where you're asked to describe yourself in 3 words, and you don't really know what angle to take. You could highlight your best qualities, make commentary on your worst, or hopefully do a little bit of both. I find, however, that the answers I always give to these questions are seldom truthful, because any description of who I am that doesn't touch upon my queerness wouldn't be an accurate reflection of myself. Now, a few years ago, you would never hear me say that. I used to believe that my relationship with gender and sexuality didn't define me, and that it shouldn't define me. Back then, I believed that my essence and sense of self should be supplemented but never taken over by labels. And while that method of identification is fair and valuable, don't get me wrong, I also know that this is not how people see me. My queerness has always been something that was very, very visible, and I've never been able to escape it. Before I ever had the language to describe my sexuality or gender, everyone around me had already formed concrete, unshakable assumptions about who I am. Now, for the most part, this was extremely stressful. Being young and queer in an environment full of toxic masculinity and otherism, living this life of stealth was my goal. I used to deeply believe that the only way I could ever achieve true happiness was if I could be perceived as no different from my peers. And all of these assumptions threatened that lifestyle I had idealized. Now, not everyone around me has made these assumptions, however, and it's actually become quite shocking to see people be surprised about my identity. I remember one time during my freshman year, I casually mentioned liking this boy in front of a very sheltered acquaintance of mine. And he replied, "Oh my God, this changes everything." Fortunately, when he came back over the weekend, he reported back to me that he spoke to his mom, who said that gay people are really funny, so everything was okay. Regardless of whether people guess that I'm queer, or in the rare case that they're shocked to hear such a thing, one common trend remains. Queerness, in the eyes of everyone around me, takes the front seat. Now, I want to take a quick break to note that everybody has their own definition of the word queer, and I would like to give you mine. To me personally, queerness can be described as an experience of ambiguity with gender and sexuality. I've had to come out several different times over the years, as my experience of attraction and my relationship with my gender have never really stayed stagnant. Even though I can't say I feel represented by the same labels I maybe used in middle school, these experiences were so real and valuable in my trajectory of understanding who I am today. And the word queer has a charming ambiguity that encompasses all of that. As you can all probably assume by my readiness to label myself as queer, I am quite proud of my identity, and that was a very hard place to arrive at. Before I ever could fully accept myself and reach this place of true understanding and acceptance, I was hindered by my own bitterness surrounding how lonely I felt. I found that even in the most open of spaces, there's this metaphysical veil separating me and my world from others, which is especially true in my academic experiences. The most perfect example of this is through a kind of turbulent experience I had at a group bonding retreat. The dorming for our houses were gendered, which for me was utterly terrifying. Historically speaking, I don't really jive too well with boys, and the idea of having to stay with this huge group of them sounded like something straight out of a nightmare. Despite this, I tried, but a group of them were saying offensive things about me in the room next door, and I had just been made to feel unsafe and a little unwelcomed. Like I knew that something like this would happen, and I had let my guard down just to face a reminder of why this very guard exists. Come our next retreat, I was supposed to stay with my girlies, but we were informed while setting up our room that my staying with them was a legal liability. The retreat center's best option was to put me in this little shed off the side of the house. Now, the shed had no service, so I couldn't really text my friends about how sad I was. The heater was turned on way too high, so I was sweating despite it being winter, and it was on this empty, rusty bunk bed. I think its creaks broke the decibel scale. Now, while here, I couldn't escape this debilitating feeling of confinement. I had just watched all of my closest friends sitting around in this circle where they're spilling tea and watching movies, and I couldn't partake in this. And I also had just watched all of the boys playing cards, joking around, and flaunting this circle of brotherhood that I would never be let into. Now, I'm not telling this story to be maudlin. I'm telling this because it's a perfect representation of the physical separation between myself and my non-queer counterparts. This imaginary veil separating me and my experiences from theirs is often quite palpable. And this experience is so fueled by gender. The boys I've known for over a decade still prefer to stay away from me, afraid that my queerness could rub off on them like a disease. And by default, most of my friends have been girls. But it's quite clear that in many cases, my identity has curbed closeness. I can ultimately say that I've spent most of my life being labeled as too outwardly feminine for boys and too intrinsically masculine for girls, a categorization which has fueled and upheld this veil for my entire life. Now, as most of this occurred in schools or in academic spaces, I can't help but blame some of my past instructors for their contribution to this otherness. School is, at its core, a space we go to learn and to be socialized, and part of that experience requires teaching students about identity and exhibiting cultural competency. I have seen my peers grow over the years from awkward conversations about identity, and I have watched students cultivate their empathetic tendencies and understandings of social justice from teacher-led discussions. During my first year of high school, our ELA department's entire roster of books was about identity, which is exactly the direction we should be heading in. But I've also noticed that queer identities are rarely brought up in these conversations, and queer themes were never explored in these literatures. I now, for the first time, have an openly queer teacher, and they are helping students grow. Students who hurled offensive slurs at me over the years are now asking questions about non-binary identities and sitting underneath the trans pride flag during class. While I'm not saying that a teacher's choice to discuss queer themes in the classroom is what will solve homophobia or transphobia, I am saying that students need a space to learn about these issues outside of Jerry Springer or their family's biases, which is what most of my generation had growing up. I can say with a lot of confidence that if any one of my teachers from my elementary to middle school years taught a simple lesson about homophobia or transphobia being innately wrong, my experiences in school would have been drastically different. But I understand why teachers try to avoid these conversations. Directly after the Pulse nightclub shooting, I was heartbroken. Anytime a catastrophic event took place, my school would host a moment of silence in the morning, and teachers would talk about what happened throughout the day, offering support where was needed, and asking students how they felt. The shooting took place on a Sunday, so I came in the next day fully prepared to unpack all of its layers, but the morning announcements passed by without a moment of silence, and the day went on without any talk of what happened over the weekend. I expressed to my teacher how hurt everyone's silence made me, and he asked me to stay after chat with him. While there, he went on to express that he specifically avoided this topic because he knew that certain students wouldn't handle it with sufficient maturity, and he didn't want that to impact students who were genuinely affected by the shooting. Now, my snarky friend told him to take the LGBT ally sticker off his door if he was going to act that way, and we ended our conversation. But the next day, he came into school and he apologized. Explaining that our conversation made him understand more about students' needs, he promised to use this experience to fuel the way he teaches in the future. When I started high school, he started the GSA. He worked to give students access to queer literature in the school library, and he took on this role of active allyship, and I could have asked for nothing more. Now, I'm not saying that every single person should use what this one teacher did as a model for their own allyship, but I am saying that allies need to be more active across the board. Whether you are a teacher navigating how to construct the right safe spaces in the classroom, a student noticing the lack of queer themes in your history or ELA curriculum, or even a parent noticing a child struggling, I implore you to speak up, ask questions, even if it feels awkward, and see what you personally can do to make sure that the spaces you inhabit are comfortable and accessible for everyone in your life. And if they aren't, try to change that. If everybody adopts this mindset, no one person will have to overexert themselves fighting this fight. And the burden to deconstruct the veil, which has existed for far too long, will no longer fall on the backs of the queer community. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Anderson, and I'm the high school youth minister here at Nativity. I am so happy to be a part of this week with you all. This shows great courage that you're showing up and you're listening to these videos. This week, we have the opportunity to not only learn from, but also to celebrate our LGBTQ brothers, sisters, and siblings in Christ. And this is an amazing time for all of us. So thank you for joining us, and please listen to the whole week. Through my years in ministry, I've had a lot of conversations with parents, with students, community members, and ministry leaders about this important topic. One challenge that arises for a lot of people is our reactions. When someone we know, love, and care about come out as LGBTQ, how do we react? What do we say? How do we talk about it with our peers, with our colleagues, with our bosses, with our other family members, with our friends? And how do you wrestle with the person who you thought to be versus the person who is true in front of you? All of these are important questions and deserve to be honored with answers. I want to take a few minutes to share with you some truths that I have come to over my life. First, be honored and privileged that the person who's coming out is coming out with you. It can be a scary time. Many people in the LGBTQ community carry this secret as a piece of shame for years, if not decades. It takes a lot of bravery for them to show their true selves to anybody. And they're picking you. That's amazing. That's great. They're inviting you to go on a journey with them. They're inviting you into an intimate and deep relationship with them. Be honored to be a part of this part of their lives. Make sure that you recognize the bravery that it does take for them as individuals to show their true selves. As I've said, this can be a really scary and frightening time. Encourage and lift them up to continue to live into their true identities as long as you're privileged enough to be a part of that journey. It's also really important to remember this is not new information for anybody. Well, for you it might be, but not for them. They have been walking this journey in solitude and alone for a very long time. The only thing that's new is your information about them. Coming out as LGBTQ can be challenging to articulate. Just as you have a hard time explaining why you know you are cisgendered or why you know you are straight, LGBTQ may have a hard time explaining how they know themselves as truly as they do. Your sexual identity and your gender identity are buried deep within our souls. They are part of our core true selves. Just because somebody cannot articulate these ideas and feelings to you doesn't make them any less valid or any less true. So please do not question how well somebody knows their true selves. There are many ways that we can support and encourage our LGBTQ friends, family, children, and siblings. Here's a couple ways. One, make sure that you're checking in with them. If they're coming out slowly, and most people do, how is it as they're coming out for them? Are they feeling accepted and supported by their friends, their peers, their team members, colleagues? What about other family members, church members, people at work? Everybody has many circles that we travel within. Make sure you are checking in regularly to keep up to date on how their information is being received by other people in their lives. They may come to a truthful and painful realization that they may need to form new communities and let go of some relationships that they've held true and dear, because not everyone can be as affirming and as respectful as you have been. So make sure that you're checking in with them and asking how it's going on the regular. Also, if they're coming out publicly over social media, make sure that you're supporting them there too. Like their posts, leave affirming and positive messages for them. If somebody is not as positive and you want to come to the defense of your loved one, before you hit send, before you hit post, double check with the person whom you are speaking about to make sure that your language and your energy is true to them. Not all LGBTQ people use the same adjectives and identifications. You want to make sure that you are respecting the other person, so you're speaking their truth. Let them dictate the language. Let them dictate the journey. Also, make sure you're not outing somebody unintentionally. Before you speak about their business with anybody else, double check. Is it okay if I talk to your dad about this, or your grandparents, or the neighbor down the street, or my best friend, or your auntie? Whoever it is that you want to speak with about your child, make sure that you have their permission and you're not outing them. It can be a confusing and challenging time for a lot of people, not only the person who is coming out, but the people who are receiving the information. We read in the book of Matthew in the 22nd chapter that our commandments from Jesus is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. This is the first and most important commandment. The second is much like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments hang all of the law and all of the prophets. That's great news for us. We don't have to worry about anything other than loving God, loving neighbor. That neighbor might be your son or daughter. That neighbor might be your niece or nephew. That neighbor might be your actual neighbor across the street from you. That neighbor could be a kid at the grocery store. Our jobs are simply to love and to respect and to honor, not to judge. That's great news for all of us. That being said, we each do have our own feelings, emotions, and journeys that we're walking. We may feel the need to confide in somebody about our journey. We may feel that we need to talk about our emotional response with somebody else. I know that as a parent, when my children were young, I had hopes, wishes, dreams, thoughts, all these great ideas about the people they would become. Not much of what I thought was going to be true came out to be true. However, it's important that we remember, although the child in front of us may not be the exact person we always thought they were, they are still lovable and deeply loved. But we need to talk to. Parents need our own support circles, and we need individuals that we can speak with. So I'm going to offer up myself and our pastors here at Nativity. If you are struggling with LGBTQ identity or gender identity, I want you to feel safe to call and to speak with us. If you're a parent of a student who's struggling, we are a safe place. If you are a grandparent or a community member who knows somebody who might be struggling, please know that you have a place here, that you belong in this community. At Nativity, we say that we welcome all people, regardless of where they are on their journey of faith. I'm going to tell you that we also welcome all people, our lesbian, gay, trans, bisexual, asexual, intersexual, and all of the other pluses that live within there are welcome at this community, and we encourage conversation with you. If you need any additional resources, please let me know, and I will be happy to help walk that journey with you. Thank you, everyone. God bless.